I mentioned about my experience of Saturday morning Mass. Of course, back then there was about 20 of us who got up for Mass on Saturday morning. So to see a crowd like this is most heartening. And I recognize that we have the McHenry County Prayer Breakfast. For some following, and others this is the normal Saturday morning. But how important it is to have that life of prayer as a part of what we do. And we need to be clear about it, that without the life of prayer, the heart grows cold and we will not succeed. There were three quick things in the gospel that I think remind us of the need for prayer and the need to keep our hearts pure towards God, pure towards everything of this earth. The first being simply Christ's statement that you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and money. You cannot serve God and prestige or pleasure or that earthly security that makes problems seem to stay at a certain distance. Our task is first and foremost to serve God and be willing to let everything else go. And that is perhaps the first question for the purity of heart. Am I willing to let everything go? And that's perhaps something that we learn throughout a lifetime. It perhaps isn't something that comes in a moment, and yet it is the constant goal for us. God and God alone. The second thing is that in the gospel, Christ says that God knows your hearts. God knows each and every one of us at every given moment. And sometimes we might step back from that a little bit and say, oh my goodness, that means that every one of those nasty thoughts that I didn't say but I had, every one of those sort of small movements, God sees them, and yes, He does. But it also means that every good thought that you had, every moment looking at someone else who's annoying you and saying, I wonder what's giving them such a bad day. I wonder what struggle they're fighting through. Your efforts to be merciful, even internally, towards others. All of this, too, is what God knows, because God knows the hearts. The third thing He says in the gospel is that the one who is trustworthy in little things will be found trustworthy in greater things. You and I, shall we say, earn our salvation. We cooperate with Christ in grace. So often not in the great moment of martyrdom, but in the daily and small and little moments. And there too, God sees. God sees the heart, He sees the struggle, He sees the victory, He sees every little drop of good that we have ever tried to do. On a morning like this, where there's going to be the gathering for the prayer breakfast, a Saturday morning of gathered at the greatest prayer that we have, which is the Mass, we are reminded, because God sees the hearts, because you can't serve two masters, because we need to be faithful in little things, that we need that constant effort of prayer, constant conversation with God, so that our hearts remain pure to do all of the things that God wants us to do, to love Him, ultimately to have that pure heart ready to be with Him when our time comes.